Welcome to Vedic IAS Academy, India's largest online IAS academy. My name is Satul Shankar. I am a faculty at Vedic IAS Academy. Today, on this New Year Day, we are coming up with a short, quick revision on major current affairs events, especially after the UPSC Civil Services Preliminary Examination held on October 2021. So, in this session, we will be reviewing few of the current affairs on major topics across history, geography, polity and governance, international relations, internal security, economics, and other miscellaneous topics. So, I welcome all of you to this revision session on current affairs. The first topic that we are going to discuss is the Personal Data Protection Bill of 2019. All of you might have heard about Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 that was prominently covered in the media during November 2021. Now, what is basically Personal Data Protection Bill? It protects the personal data of an individual. Now, it defines what we call as a sensitive personal data. A sensitive personal data includes the financial data of a person. Similarly, the biometric information of a person that requires additional safeguards. The third important aspect of Personal Data Protection Bill is it establishes a data protection authority. And the fourth important aspect of Personal Data Protection Bill is the mandate to regulate processing of personal data of Indian citizens by the government and private entities, both domestic, foreign and multinational in nature. Now, in the context of this mandate, that is regulating the processing of personal data of individuals, Indian citizens, the bill was in news. Now, what are the controversial aspects? Section 35 of the Personal Data Protection Bill empowers the sender with the right to suspend all or any portions of the Act for government agencies in the interest of India's sovereignty and integrity, state security, public order and cordial relationships with foreign governments. The opposition charges that Section 35 can be abused by the sender to process the personal data. In other words, the central agencies would become or would enjoy impunity over the handling of personal data. Now, Section 12 allows for the processing of data for the advantage or the service of the data principle with the advance warning or with the prior approval of the data principle. Now, along with that, we have to be quite sure about the importance of Unique ID Authority of India, UIDAI. It is a statutory authority and the law that constitute UIDAI is Aadhaar Targeted Delivery of Financial and Other Subsidies Benefits Act of 2016. It is also known as, or the date of adoption is on March 11, 2016 and the role of Aadhaar is, or Unique ID Authority of India is to provide the residents of India with unique ID numbers known as Aadhaar. Residents of India, not citizens of India. A resident is an individual who has been staying within the territory of India for more than 180 days in a given year.
Myself, Shilpa, faculty at Vedic IAS Academy. So let's move on with some of the important current affairs topic. The first topic, as you can see here on the screen, is Karnataka to observe Onake Obava Jayanti. So, who is Onake Obava? Let's come back to that after. Let's know what actually happened there. See, the Kannada and the Culture Department had proposed celebrating the birth anniversary of Onake Obava, a woman soldier who had fought against the forces of Hyder Ali in Chitradurga in the 18th century. So, she is a woman warrior. Okay. So, all the female warriors in the ancient history, medieval history and modern history, they are important. They are seen as a symbol of women empowerment. So, whenever you see a historical figure who is a woman being mentioned in any of the newspaper articles, or if any of the state governments or our Indian government celebrates the birth anniversary of any of them, maybe you should take a note of them. Okay, and make sure that you go through the situations in which they were involved with. And here, the strong fort of Chitradurga, that's how the story goes. Okay, the Chitradurga fort in present day Karnataka was ruled by Madakari Nayaka. The name of the ruler was Madakari Nayaka in the 18th century. Okay, and Hyder Ali, as you have all studied, father of Tipu Sultan, the Muslim ruler repeatedly tried to capture the fort of Chitradurga and defeat Madakari Nayaka. So, Madakari Nayaka was the ruler of Chitradurga and Hyder Ali repeatedly tried to defeat him. And a woman warrior who fought the forces of Hyder Ali single-handedly with a pestle known as Onake in Kannada. You might have seen the pestle that is used to grind. Okay, and with that, she actually killed many of the enemies who tried to invade the fort. Okay, now if you go further, you would be able to see this or listen to this interesting story. The story goes that Onake Obava was the wife of a guardian soldier in the fort of Madakari Nayaka in Karnataka, of the Chitradurga fort. Okay, and the fort was built with stones which was very hard to invade. The enemies could not get into the fort. Okay, but the enemies found out that there was this particular hole through which the enemies could invade. But the hole could actually accommodate only one person at a time. So, Hyder Ali, after knowing this, he'd sent his troop to get inside the fort one by one. Now, Obava, who was the wife of this soldier, comes to know about this. Now, knowing that her husband was not there, she comes with a onake, that is a pestle. She waited for one soldier to come at a time and she killed him with that pestle. And then she killed a considerable number of enemies with that. That's how the story goes. So, she is a brave warrior woman. Okay, so now, when you get a current affairs such as this, like this one, you should also move a step forward and look for other similar things that has happened around. For example, now here we have a woman fighter, a warrior from Karnataka. Let's look at the other women warriors of Karnataka. See, this is the kind of knowledge quest that UPSC looks into in you. Okay, if you have that curiosity to know, if you have that thirst to know more about it. Okay, see, Abbaka Rani was the first Tuluva queen of Ullal in coastal Karnataka who fought the Portuguese. So, Abbaka Rani was from coastal Karnataka and her fight was against the Portuguese. Now, Keladi Chennamma, she was the queen of Keladi kingdom who is known for fighting against the Mughal emperor Aurangzeb. So, Keladi Chennamma, her fight was against the Mughal emperor Aurangzeb. And Kittur Chennamma, she was the queen of Kittur, known for the 1824 revolt against the British East India Company. Okay, so Kittur Chennamma, her fight was against the British East India Company here. So that is how you go about looking for current affairs. When you have a news, you look at the core part, and also once you have referred to the syllabus and the previous year question, you would be able to guess what kind of question can be asked from that particular news, and then you look for further information that is relevant and could be asked for the exam. Okay?
My name is Shahul. I am a faculty member at Vedic IAS Academy. Now, we are going to discuss some of the events that is happened over the last year, that is during 2021. So the first event, that is one sun, one world, one grid. So what is the context of that particular event? So our Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi ji has called for one sun, one world, one grid for improving the viability of solar power. See, actually everybody knows the solar energy that is received over the earth is different. That is, for the tropical and subtropical region, it will receive a high amount of solar energy as compared to the polar regions. So, in order to make a transnational solar energy, our Prime Minister has envisioned the concept of one sun, one world, one grid. So it is actually a transnational global electricity power supply grid, for the transfer of electricity generated from solar power from the surplus areas to deficit areas. So literally, it is the transfer of energy from the solar surplus area to solar deficit area. So it is actually planned to implement in a phase-by-phase manner. So it is planned in a three-phase implementation. Over the first phase, interconnectivity within the Asian continent. So it is actually envisioned. First of all, during the phase 1, it is an interconnectivity over the Asian continent. Apart from that, we will add the addition of African continent. Then there will be a global interconnection over the third phase. So it will be planned to implement over a phase-by-phase mode. Apart from that, the theme of this particular one sun, one world, one grid project is actually the sun never set. Its financial partner is actually the World Bank, and its technical assistance will be provided by International Solar Alliance. So these informations are essential for your UPSC preliminary examination. But in the context of mains perspective, you have to analyze what is its long-term as well as short-term impact due to the implementation of one sun, one world, one grid project. So you have to analyze in both a critic as well as in advantage manner. So both the perspective is very important for your UPSC mains examination. So it will help in mobilization of finance, skill development, technology transfer for setting up of the renewable energy project in the participating countries. Then economies of scale, which helps a lessen project cost, higher efficiencies and increased asset utilization. So in a short-term perspective, it will help in the transfer of a surplus energy from the surplus energy developing country to the deficit countries. But apart from the energy transfer, one of the another important significance is regarding with improving the diplomatic relations over the international relations perspective. So this particular paper is important, or this particular topic is important for your UPSC examination perspective regarding with the infrastructure and development as well as international relations. So that's all about one sun, one world, one grid project.
Global Hunger Index. All of you might have heard about the dismal performance of India in the Global Hunger Index. India has been ranking worst in the Global Hunger Index, especially for the past 5 years. And now the standing of India in the Global Hunger Index amongst the Committee of Global Nations is below 100. Now, what is Global Hunger Index? The Global Hunger Index is compiled by International Food Policy Research Institute, which is an NGO based out of Washington. And the Global Hunger Index is an annual publication since 2006, which means the first edition of Global Hunger Index was published in 2006. The objective of the Global Hunger Index is to measure the magnitude of hunger prevailing in a country on a scale that ranges from 0 to 100. A country with 0 on a global hunger scale means there is no hunger. Best score on the scale. While 100 means there is prevalent hunger, absolute hunger. It represents the worst score. Now, how do the International Food Policy Research Institute based out of Washington measures the performance of the country or ranks the country? Scores are assigned, that is 0 to 100. The scores are assigned for the countries on the basis of a survey data, comparing against the best available survey over identified indices with weighted average method, or in other words, a survey is being carried out and weights are assigned. For example, infant mortality, 1/3 of the weightage is provided for infant mortality for measuring the score of any country on a global hunger index. Then, child malnourishment, it is assigned a weightage of another 1/3. Child stunting, for child stunting the weightage is 1/6, and child wasting, the weightage is 1/6. So 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/6 plus 1/6, that is, it would become 1. So a weighted average method of survey data of infant mortality rate, child malnourishment, child stunting and child wasting is used to calculate the score of countries on a global hunger index. I also want to bring your attention that it is not only IFPRI or International Food Policy Research Institute which is associated with Global Hunger Index, but a number of other NGOs are indeed associated with the Global Hunger Index. But International Food Policy Research Institute is the most predominant NGO.
Now let's move on to the next one, the Atlantic Charter, which has been in news recently. President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, recently reaffirmed their commitment to the principle of Atlantic Charter. It means that they have reaffirmed. So there was an Atlantic Charter before, okay? And stressed the need for new Atlantic Charter, pledging to defend the principles, values and institutions of democracy and open societies. Democracies and open societies being the core factor, they have actually pledged to renew or renew their commitment towards a new Atlantic Charter here. Okay, now let's see what the Atlantic Charter was all about. See, Atlantic Charter, a declaration signed by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and it was signed in August 1941. What was the time? The time was of the Second World War. Okay, setting out common goals for world after Second World War. So they envisioned a world after the Second World War, how the world should be at peace, how the countries should be, how the people should respect each other. So the kind of vision that they had, they summarized it in the Atlantic Charter. And was signed in 1941 between Winston Churchill, British Prime Minister, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, US President. Okay. Now, those goals included freer trade, less trade barriers, disarmament and the right to self-determination of all people, and the Allied powers. There were two powers, the Allied power and the Axis power in World War II. If you do not know, please go and look for it. Okay. And the Allied powers quickly endorsed the charter. They all supported the charter. Okay. Now, the US and UK chartered a post-war order that prioritized the self-determination of sovereign nations, that sovereign nations could have this right. They had the sovereignty and the reduction of trade barriers and the disarmament of hostile nations so that there would not be another world war, and a united drive to ensure better economic and social conditions of all people. General peace and prosperity was the core theme. Okay. Now, the fact that diverse nations with different sets of opinion agreed to these common principles was significant and later proved to be one of the catalysts for the formation of the United Nations. Okay, so this formed the basis for the United Nations, and the success of Atlantic Charter, one of the success was that the countries which had different ideologies, different perception about the democracy and the values, they all agreed to this charter. So it was a success. Okay, so in 1946, Winston Churchill was the first person to describe the alliance between the US and the UK as being something special. So this is an important fact. So Winston Churchill was the first person to actually describe the alliance of US, the United States of America and the United Kingdom, Britain and America as being something special. Okay, so over the years, as the partnership witnessed highs and lows, they had their good time and the bad time. See, any country and their bilateral relationship has their ups and downs. They too had it. But the phrase itself never left the public lexicon. They always mentioned that their relationship with each other, that the relationship that USA shared with the United Kingdom was always special. That's how they mentioned it. And the New Atlantic Charter, which is all about the news that is recently in the newspaper, which is the New Atlantic Charter, is a 600-word document. Okay, so the New Atlantic Charter is a 600-word document that reaffirms the joint commitment of the US and the UK on a range of issues. Okay, so the initial Atlantic Charter was not in a proper treaty or a proper document form in which both the parties could sign. That was not the case. But here, now the New Atlantic Charter, it's a 600-word document that reaffirms the joint commitment of US and UK on a range of issues which started from the initial Atlantic Charter. Okay, the charter, the new one, touches upon topics like climate change, which is a very, very important topic right now, the COVID-19 crisis and the emerging role of technology, but its main focus is that of national security along the lines of original Atlantic Charter. So, national security being the prime reason for the Atlantic Charter, the New Atlantic Charter. The other reasons like climate change, COVID-19 and the emerging technological progression also holds importance. Okay, now towards that end, it alludes to a shared responsibility for maintaining our collective security and international stability. Those are the lines that are there in the charter, and commits to defending the principles, values and the institution of democracy. It also refers to the need of protecting democratic institutions and upholding principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. So, every single word, it actually reaffirms the sovereignty, the values, the peaceful democratic values that both these countries hold. Okay, and they are trying to reaffirm it, they are trying to spread it, they are trying to reassure the value of those parameters that are supposed to be followed by every country. Okay?
Another important news that is regarding with Kaiser-i-Hind. So what is mean by Kaiser-i-Hind? In your history textbooks, you are already familiar with that particular term, right? Kaiser-i-Hind. So it literally means Emperor of India. So what is the context? Recently, the Arunachal Pradesh State Cabinet has approved the Kaiser-i-Hind as the state butterfly of Arunachal Pradesh. So that is why that particular butterfly was in news. So it is actually a large and bright colored butterfly. It elusive swallow-tail butterfly which carries India in its name. Okay, literally means Kaiser-i-Hind, literally means Emperor of India. So when you study that particular butterfly, UPSC can ask the questions or whatever may be the state public service examination, they can ask in different manner. For example, recently the Kaiser-i-Hind is declared state butterfly at which among the following Indian states? Okay, that is a particular perspective of the expected question. Apart from that, one of the another, okay, they can give the scientific name. Okay, that term was in use. So when you study for a competitive exam, you should go through in this manner. Okay, so the scientific name, Teniopalpus imperialis, then its wingspan about 90 to 120 millimeters, and mainly these butterflies are found over the eastern Himalayas at the elevation of 6,000 to 10,000 feet, and they are well preserved over the well-wooded terrain areas. Okay, they can also found over Bhutan, Nepal, Laos, Myanmar, southern China, and over the Vietnam. Under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, these butterflies are included under Schedule 2 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Apart from that, under the site, okay, it was included in Appendix 1, and they are also protected under IUCN Red List. Okay, so this is the status of Kaiser-i-Hind.
Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, popularly known as Quad. It is a strategic dialogue between, as the name suggests, 4 countries. The 4 countries includes India, United States of America, Japan, and Australia. They have a common motive to come together. The common motive is to respond against the increased Chinese economic and military power, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, during 2017, the member states revived the Quadrilateral Alliance in order to counter the China military and diplomatically, especially in South China Sea, and since then, they have expanded the scope of area to the whole of Indo-Pacific region. In fact, this concept of Quadrilateral Alliance is nothing new, but this initiative gained traction, especially after the China began to flex its muscle, especially against the littoral states of South China Sea, that would include Vietnam, Philippines, in the South China Sea. Now, what are the core objectives of the Quad? Secure a rule-based global order. We know China has been challenging the rule-based global order in the South China Sea. China claims the whole of South China Sea to itself. Now, freedom of navigation and a liberal trading system. South China Sea is a major sea lane of communication, and the military aggression of China could in fact adversely impact the global trade and commerce. Offer alternative debt financing for nations in the India-Pacific region. So beyond the military angle to the Quad Alliance, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad Alliance of 4 countries, India, USA, Japan, and Australia, also seeks to provide assistance to the littoral states of especially the Pacific region. Then, strategic sea routes in Indo-Pacific free of any military or political influence. As I have told you, the Indo-Pacific region and especially the South China Sea is a major sea lane of communication, and all the countries, including USA, Japan, Australia, and India, want a regime where there is free flow of trade and commerce without any military or without any particular military or political influence. Now, about Quad, we can say that it was founded in 2007. Before that, there were alliances between 3 countries or alliances between 2 countries which were all independent. but Quad as a grouping of 4 countries came together after 2007. And it was revived in 2017. And the objective, the stated objective, do not talk about China. It talks like this: work for a free, open, prosperous and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. That is the open or the stated mandate of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. And the very important aspect of Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is, unlike ASEAN, unlike SAARC, unlike United Nations Organization or European Union, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is an informal grouping of intergovernmental organization. And what do you mean by informal? It do not have a treaty. It do not have a secretariat or headquarters. Rather, it is an informal grouping of 4 countries with a mandate to work for a free, open and prosperous and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. And the members, as I have mentioned, India, United States of America, Japan and Australia. And how this informal arrangement works: through regular summits, through 2+2 dialogue that would include the Minister of External Affairs Minister of India and the Defense Minister participating with their peers in countries of Japan, USA and Australia. Then there are informal exchanges, military drills, and the most notable aspect is that the last held Malabar Naval Exercise witnessed the participation of all the 4 countries of this Quadrilateral Security Dialogue for the very first time. India, Japan, Australia and USA participated together in the military exercise, naval exercise Malabar, for the very first time in 2021. And this shows the strong commitments of these 4 nations to counter the growing influence of China in the South China Sea and beyond South China Sea in the Indo-Pacific region.
Now let's go to the next topic, which is the Chagos Islands dispute. You must have now heard about Diego Garcia, right? So the International Court of Justice has advised the UK, United Kingdom, to return the Diego Garcia to Mauritius as rapidly as possible. Okay, so Diego Garcia is the largest island in Chagos Islands. Alright, so now the ICJ has said that Britain must give Mauritius control of the Chagos archipelago in the Indian Ocean. The advisory has been issued by the International Court of Justice on the request of resolution passed by the United Nations General Assembly to look into the issue. So this is the issue. The ICJ has asked United Kingdom to return the Chagos archipelago back to Mauritius. So right now, Chagos archipelago is an overseas territory of the United Kingdom. Clear? Let's see. Mauritius has argued that the Chagos Islands has been a part of its territory since at least the 18th century, till the United Kingdom broke the archipelago away from Mauritius in 1965. That's when United Kingdom broke the archipelago which originally belonged to Mauritius from it in 1965. So here, this is where Chagos archipelago lies. Okay, this is the location. See here? Okay, clear? In the Indian Ocean here. Now, the UK declared these islands as overseas territory in November 1965. So this is Sri Lanka, this is India here, this is Sri Lanka, and this is where the Chagos Islands archipelago is. This is where Chagos archipelago comes over, and Diego Garcia is the southernmost island over here, which is the largest one too. See, if you want a magnified image of Diego Garcia, it is here. You can see on the screen. Alright, so this is Maldives here. This is Maldives. This is Lakshadweep. Okay, so if they ask you, this is Diego Garcia. Okay, if they ask you the north and south orientation of the islands in the Indian Ocean, you must be able to answer it. Okay, now after Mauritius gained independence from the United Kingdom in 1968, the United Kingdom refused to return the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. So Mauritius got independence in 1968, but the UK refused to give back Chagos Islands. The largest island on the Chagos Islands archipelago, Diego Garcia, is also where the United States of America and the UK cooperate a large military base and was also used as a US military base for the US-led attacks against Afghanistan and Iraq in the 2000s. That holds very an important part, because now the US has a military base in the Chagos Islands or Diego Garcia. Okay, see here in Diego Garcia, where US has a military base. Now, UK cannot just give it back to Mauritius. That will actually have a conflict with the United States of America, because both of them, US and UK, they have their military base there. They have a joint military base. Okay, so there is political conflict, there is ethical conflict in returning back Chagos Islands to Mauritius. But the ICJ has said that UK should, as fast as possible, return back Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Okay, now in 2015, this is how the timeline goes. What has Mauritius done to get back Chagos Islands? See, in 2015, Mauritius initiated legal proceedings in these matters against the United Kingdom in the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague in Netherlands. Now, this is a homework for you. You have to go back, look up at the difference between the International Court of Justice and the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Okay? Now, the Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled in 2015 that the United Kingdom failed to give due regards to Mauritius' rights and declared that the United Kingdom had breached its obligation under the United Nations Convention on the Laws of Seas, the UN clause. Okay, so what did the Permanent Court of Arbitration say? They ruled in favor of Mauritius. Okay, and said that the UK has breached the international rule. And in June 2017, at the United Nations General Assembly, 94 countries voted in support of Mauritius' resolution to seek an advisory opinion on legal status of the Chagos Islands from the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Okay, and UK did vote against it, obviously. Now, in February 2019, the United Nations highest court of justice, the International Court of Justice, now from here you know that it's a part of the United Nations, and ordered the UK to return the Chagos Island to Mauritius as rapidly as possible. As fast as possible, Chagos Islands were to be returned to the Mauritius. And after the ICJ ruling, the United Kingdom Foreign Office said that ICJ ruling was an advisory opinion, not a judgment, and claimed that the defense facilities on British Indian Ocean territory help to protect the people here in Britain and around the world from terrorist threats, organized crime and privacy. Now they say that, well, the International Court of Justice had taken a decision, but that is not binding on the parties. And also the military base in the Diego Garcia Island is there to protect the whole world. That's what they say. Now the time period in which they were supposed to return back Chagos Archipelago to Mauritius is over. We have to see how the dispute unfolds now. Okay, so here the important part, if you have gone through the previous questions and the syllabus, we get to know that from this news what's important is the Chagos Archipelago. Okay, and the archipelago, the location, the geographical part of it. Alright, so the Chagos Archipelago is a group of 55 isolated, low-lying coral islands in the central Indian Ocean, which covers an area of 64 square kilometers of land. And this is the longitudinal and latitudinal location. The largest island of Chagos Archipelago is known as Diego Garcia, and the island is currently a site of joint US-UK military facility. Okay, so this is India, this is Sri Lanka, Maldives here, this is Seychelles, this is Cocos Islands, Mauritius, Reunion Island, Diego Garcia of the Chagos Archipelago here. See, okay. So make sure that Maldives, Seychelles, Cocos, Mauritius, you take a note of all these important island nations. Okay, they may probably ask you a north-south orientation or an east-west location of these islands.
Then another important news is regarding with defense technologies. Okay, S-400 Triumph air defense system. So why that was in news? See, it is actually a part of bilateral defense agreement between India and Russia. So Russia has recently started the delivering of S-400 missile system to India. See, everybody knows India has a very long tradition of a defense partnership with Russia. Okay, so S-400 Triumph. So its country of origin is actually Russia, and its manufacturer or the original equipment manufacturer is actually Almaz, Central Design Bureau for Marine Engineering. And it is actually a defense or the air defense or the advanced air defense systems. Its category includes the mobile, and it is actually surface to air missile systems, and it has a range of approximately 400 kilometers. So what is the significance of this particular S-400 Triumph over the Indian defense technologies? See, actually India has a border conflict with, especially over the Pakistan and the Chinese part, right? So obviously this particular defense equipment or the S-400 Triumph advanced air defense system can provide additional protection to the Indian military forces, especially over the borders of Pakistan as well as China. Okay, so that is one of the major significance of this particular S-400 Triumph deal that is between India and Russia. Apart from that, on this particular context itself, you may be familiar with the term CAATSA. Okay, countering American advisories through Sanction Act. So actually, this is a particular legislation passed by the US Congress against their advisories. Especially, this particular America has listed some of the countries which the other countries has some sort of significant partnership. It may be economic, okay, it may be defense relations. So this particular CAATSA was also in news that is related to S-400 Triumph. Okay. So that is regarding with S-400 Triumph air defense system.
Prompt Corrective Action Framework. The Reserve Bank of India modified the Prompt Corrective Action Framework introduced in December 2002 to exclude the profitability parameter from its trigger list. Now, what is Prompt Corrective Action Framework? The objective of Prompt Corrective Action Framework is to establish a supervised entity to implement remedial measures in a time-bound manner for restoring the financial health of banking financial institutions. To restore the health of banking financial institutions. Now, what is basically Prompt Corrective Action Framework? The Prompt Corrective Action Framework is nothing but it is a continuous evaluation of the financial health of a banking financial institution based on certain parameters such as capital to risk weighted asset ratio, similarly the asset quality, profitability, tier 1 capital. So there are certain parameters, and these parameters are continuously evaluated by Reserve Bank of India, and banks are grouped into various categories under this Prompt Corrective Action Framework. So if I could put it simply, the Reserve Bank of India is not going to implement the remedial measures once the bank is on the brink of bank run or the collapse. Rather, the financial health of banking financial institutions are continuously monitored using certain key performance indicators such as capital, asset quality, profitability, leverage ratio, etc. And based upon these key performance indicators, the banking financial institutions are being categorized into 3 categories and remedial measures are taken accordingly. Now, it aims to check the non-performing asset problems in the banking sector of India. It helps in alerting the regulator, investors and depositors in case of bank heading for trouble. So as I have stressed in the beginning, the Reserve Bank of India would not be at a point of disadvantage because the Reserve Bank of India is continuously monitoring the health of the bank. If it does not follow the prompt corrective action framework, what happens is the Reserve Bank of India comes to know about the bad health of the banking financial institution once it is on the brink of collapse. That has to be avoided at all cost to ensure the financial health of not only the bank but also the economy of India. Now, which are the financial institutions covered under the prompt corrective action framework? It is banking financial institution. But as we talk now on January 1, 2022, the Reserve Bank of India a week ago has introduced the prompt corrective action framework for non-banking financial institutions also, which we will be discussing in the next class. But as of now, the news is about the Reserve Bank of India removed the key performance indicator that it used to monitor, which is profitability, and it included a new parameter, which is leverage ratio. So that is the news. So financial institutions not covered under prompt corrective action framework, cooperative banks, non-banking financial companies, and as of now, this does not stand true because 1 week ahead, the Reserve Bank of India has in fact introduced the prompt corrective action framework for non-banking financial companies also. Now, key performance indicators. The original key performance indicators includes capital. What is the capital available with the bank? Asset quality. What is the asset quality? That is, how is the quality of the loan given by the bank to its customers? Whether the principal are being paid, whether the interest are being paid, that is the asset quality. Then profitability of the bank. Now the news is the profitability has been removed and leverage ratio has been included. The key performance indicators revised includes capital, asset quality and leverage ratio instead of profitability.
Now, daylight saving time. Now, this is an interesting fact. UPSC has not yet asked anything about it, but they can ask the logic behind it. Okay, so the daylight saving time is nothing but a practice of setting clocks forward 1 hour from the standard time during the summer months and back again in the fall in order to make better use of natural daylights. It means that in the northern hemisphere, if you take the clock, see, for example, if you see, suppose, actually if the time is 2 o'clock here, okay, so if the time is 2 o'clock, originally the time is 2 o'clock around the world generally in summer months, okay, in the northern hemisphere, in the summer months, what they do is they actually set the clock as 3 o'clock, okay, 1 hour forward. So what happens is that when it is 6 o'clock here, it is 7 o'clock in these countries, which means that if it is 5 o'clock here, it's already 6 o'clock in those countries. The people have woke up early. They have started early. Okay, that means that they have got more sunlight. This is for better use of sunlight. Okay, so they get more daylight if you actually put the time 1 hour forward. Okay, that's what these countries do. Usually it is followed by countries in the towards the northern latitudes and southern latitudes, not in the middle latitudes, but usually towards the extreme latitudes. Okay, and in the winter months, they actually put it a little backward. Okay, so that they wake up late. This is for you to relate when I say wake up and sleep. But to get the idea, so if they wake up late, they can make use of, they can make better use of the sunlight, because towards those latitude, they get less sunlight during the winter months. Right? So that is the basic idea of daylight saving time in the northern hemisphere. Usually the countries North America, Central America, Europe, Asia and Northern Africa are the countries that follow this. In the southern hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand and South America, those are the countries that follow it. Okay, just understand the basic concept behind it. Okay.
Another important topic that is regarding with the recent event is deep sea mining projects. So what is the significance of deep sea mining? Recently, the Indian cabinet has approved rupees 4,077 crores for the deep sea or the deep ocean mission. So what is meant by deep sea mining, right? So it refers to the term applied to the process and technologies designed to collect marine-rich resources from the deep sea floors. So it mainly focused on three internal resources: the seafloor massive sulfides, cobalt-rich ferromagnet crust and polymetallic nodules. Okay, so these are the seabed mineral resources that is specifically focused over the deep ocean mission. So while India is going to implement this particular deep ocean mission, India become 5th country in the world to carry out such a mission after the US, Russia, France, Japan and China. So it is not the 5th, okay, pardon for the mistake, it is 6th country, okay, 6th country after US, Russia, France, Japan and China. So apart from that, you might be familiar with the term Chandrayaan, right? So Chandrayaan is actually India's moon project, okay, it is actually a space project. Similarly, there was another term, Samudrayaan, right? So from that particular name itself, you can easily understand what is meant by a Samudrayaan, right? So Samudrayaan, it is actually a manned mission, okay? So it aims to send 3 persons in a manned submersible vehicle to depth of 6,000 meters into the sea, deep ocean exploration and mining of rare minerals. And the nodal agency for the implementation of Samudrayaan project is actually National Institution for Ocean Technology, that is located at Chennai. Okay, and the project cost is expected to be 4,077 crore rupees. Then related with the Samudrayaan project, okay, Malsya 6000, okay, that was also in news. So it is actually an indigenously developed manned submersible vehicle. Facilitate the Ministry of Earth Science in conducting deep ocean exploration of the resources, okay, in which includes the gas hydrates, polymetallic nodules, hydrothermal sulfides and cobalt crust, okay, and that is expected to be located at a depth between 1000 to 5500 meters. So that is regarding for your UPSC preliminary context. So what is the significance over the mains perspective? See, you have to go through what is its significance over the long term. For example, discovering such kind of rare earth minerals can boost over the India's electronic industries. So it is not just for the exploration of the rare earth minerals, rather they can be specifically can boost over India's electronic industry, and it will also help in a realization of Make in India campaigns or the vocal for local campaigns. Okay, so that is regarding with its significance of deep ocean mission that has been envisioned by the Ministry of Earth Science.
SEBI recast delisting rules to make mergers and acquisitions easier. The SEBI has amended rules pertaining to delisting of shares of a company following an open offer as part of efforts to make mergers and acquisitions for listed firms more convenient. So, in this context, it is very important that we have to understand about Securities and Exchange Board of India. The Securities and Exchange Board of India was constituted in 1989, but it was then constituted through an executive authority. But the SEBI, as we come to know now, was reconstituted as a statutory body in 1992. Now, the Securities and Exchange Board of India Act 1992 is the law enacted by the Parliament that constituted Securities Exchange Board of India as we see now. So we can say that it was constituted through an executive order in 1989, but the SEBI, as we come to see now, was founded in 1992 through a law enacted by the Parliament, SEBI Act of 1992. The headquarters of SEBI is located in Mumbai, and the mandate of SEBI, regulator of capital markets in India. But beyond the regulator of capital market, Securities and Exchange Board of India is also the regulator of commodities market in India. So, Securities and Exchange Board of India is a regulator of capital markets in India and commodities markets in India. And the objective, oversee and protect the interest of the issuer of securities and investors and market intermediaries. Structure. The Board of Securities and Exchange Board of India is chaired by a nominated appointee, 2 officials nominated by Union Finance Minister, a RBI nominee and 5 nominees of the Union Government of India. Out of them, at least 3 shall be whole-time members. And SEBI, it enjoys quasi-executive powers. It can conduct investigation and enforce transparency in the operations of the stakeholders in the capital markets. Quasi-legislative, it can draft and approve bylaws, including amendment in operations of stock exchanges over subjects delegated through the SEBI Act of 1992, and it enjoys quasi-judicial powers, passing rules and orders. A 3-member Securities Appellate Tribunal (SAT) chaired by a retired judge of the Supreme Court or a former Chief Justice of a state high court or a retired judge of a high court with 7 years of experience, and an appeal to the Securities Appellate Tribunal lies directly to the Supreme Court of India. Now, we have been discussing, or we have rather discussed, the Securities and Exchange Board of India in the context as a regulator of capital markets. Beyond that, as I have told you, the Securities and Exchange Board of India is also the regulator of commodities markets in India after the dissolution of Forward Markets Commission that used to regulate the domestic commodity markets.
Partial lunar eclipse. That's what we are going to learn. Before we learn partial lunar eclipse, you should know what a lunar eclipse is. Okay, so what is a lunar eclipse? A lunar eclipse is when the earth blocks the sunlight that is reaching the moon and covering it in the earth's shadow. That is the lunar eclipse. Lunar eclipse is when the earth actually overshadows the moon by blocking the sunlight that's coming. Okay, now see, this is the earth and this is moon. This is sun here, and when it's a lunar eclipse, this is a lunar eclipse, okay? And here you have to understand some basic concepts, like this is the sunlight and it's coming. When the earth actually blocks the sunlight that's coming from the sun and towards the moon, it actually casts two types of shadows. This is the first kind of shadow, which is known as the penumbra. Penumbra or partial shadow. Penumbra shadow. And here, it casts another kind of narrower shadow, which is known as umbra, which is full shadow. Okay, so this area is penumbra and this area is umbra, and this is the moon's orbit. Okay, so when this happens, this is a full lunar eclipse. Alright, now I want you to understand a simple concept. The moon's orbit with respect to the earth. The moon, when it revolves around the earth, the orbit of that revolving plane is a little twisted. Like this is earth and this is moon. Okay, see, this is the normal plane, but it's a little twisted, right? A little twisted and not very linear. All right. So based on this concept, just by knowing that this simple concept, we have actually divided the lunar eclipses. Okay, like this is a full lunar eclipse and this is a partial lunar eclipse. This can be called a penumbra lunar eclipse. Okay, I'll explain what that is. Now this is a full lunar eclipse. How? See, this is earth and this is sun, and the sunlight comes here, and this is the umbra. This is the umbra, right? And in this umbra area, the moon lies. So completely the moon is in the umbra area. That is a full lunar eclipse. Okay. Now, don't think that in a full lunar eclipse you cannot see moon. You can see moon. But see, when the earth actually is an obstacle to the light, what happens is that here the earth actually refracts the low wavelength blue lights. Okay, so here you can see the blue light because it's of low wavelength. But the high wavelength red light actually bends. Okay, the atmospheric particles actually bends the light source, and the red light which has the red color light which has the more wavelength than blue, it actually bends and makes the moon red in color. Okay, so it's not that you can see the moon, you cannot see the moon in lunar eclipse. You can see, but it's in red color. Okay, and this is the reason, refraction of light. Okay, now here in the partial, see, this is the partial lunar eclipse. Okay, in the partial lunar eclipse, what happens is that only a part of the moon is in the umbra area. That is when partial lunar eclipse occurs. And here this is the penumbra lunar eclipse, which is in the penumbra area, as the name suggests, not in the umbra area. Okay, I hope it's clear. Now this is how actually the lunar eclipse look like, a full lunar eclipse. See, you can see the earth's shadow. It has reached here. Now it has reached here. And now what happens? Completely the earth has blocked the light from the sun, and the red wavelength, the red light, it has come and made the moon red in color, and the earth moves, and then slowly you can start seeing the moon again. That is the lunar eclipse, when the earth blocks the sunlight coming from the sun, blocks the sunlight towards the moon. Okay, that is when lunar eclipse occurs.
Another important news that is regarding with integrated theater commands. Okay, so why that was in news? So recently, the Department of Military Affairs under the Ministry of Defense has asked the three services of military means the Army, Navy and the Air Force to studies on the structure regarding with new information and submit their reports by April next year for the creation of integrated theater command. So in simple words, just imagine if there is a situation of war, okay, the Army, Navy and Air Force, they are actually working as an independent unit, right? So sometimes there requires an effective coordination between three military forces. So that is the real significance of this particular integrated theater command. Okay, so while going through its history, okay, Kargil Review Committee, Okay, apart from that, Naresh Chandra Committee, then Shekhar Committee. Okay, every committee regarding with the improvement of defense in our India has proposed the creation of integrated theatre command in our country. Okay, so what is about the integrated theatre command? It is actually a unified command of the three services under a single commander, that is integrated theatre commander. So the integrated theatre command can independently exercise authority to mobilize all the resources from the army, the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy. And this particular integrated theatre command will not be answerable to the individual services. Okay, so what is its significance? So the significance that you can expect for your UPSC mains examination. Obviously, the effective coordination of the military, right? So according to the proposed integrated theatre command, there will be a Western Theatre Command, there will be a Eastern Theatre Command and there will be a Southern Theatre Command. Okay, so that is the real significance between integrated theatre commander and the integration of the military in our India.
Russia-Ukraine relations. We have been seeing in the international news that Russia-Ukraine relations are getting worse. Now, it is often said that Russia would be invading Ukraine, and Ukraine is in fact bolstering its military capabilities to prevent an attack from Russia. Now, what is the important cause of strain in Russia-Ukraine relations? Russia earlier in 2015 has annexed the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Peninsula included a naval base of Russia, Sevastopol. So in 2015, considering the strategic significance of the Crimean Peninsula, it is the only warm seaport or the naval port of Russia. The Sevastopol naval port of Russia, located in the Crimean Peninsula, which used to be a territory of Ukraine and leased to Russia. The Sevastopol naval port present in the Crimean Peninsula has been leased to Russia by Ukraine, and it was the whole Crimean Peninsula was annexed by Russia in 2015. Now, after which the Russia, according to Ukraine, in fact supports the separatist movement in Donetsk Republic and Luhansk Republic that lies to the east of Ukraine and bordering Russia. Now, what Russia charges is that Ukraine is planning to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We all know that North Atlantic Treaty Organization has been spreading its scope of influence towards the Eastern Europe after the fall of Soviet Union. Russia alleges that Ukraine would act as a launch pad for further military aggressions against Russia in event of Ukraine joining the NATO or Ukraine coming under the influence of the NATO alliance. Now, in this map, you could see how the NATO has been spreading its scope of influence to the Eastern Europe. Now, in this context, we have to understand what NATO is. North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a intergovernmental military alliance constituted through the NATO Treaty or the Washington Treaty in 1949, and NATO is a intergovernmental military organization, treaty-based intergovernmental military organization with its secretariat or headquarters located at Brussels, Netherlands. The mandate is to provide collective or mutual defense agreement in response to an external aggression In other words, when any country within a NATO is attacked by a country outside the NATO alliance, the whole of NATO has a responsibility to protect the territorial integrity of the country under attack. So it is basically a intergovernmental military alliance, and Russia seriously has concerns regarding its internal security with Ukraine joining the NATO alliance.
The next thing that the important event is regarding with Armed Forces, a Special Power Act of 1958 or AFSPA. I think you might have familiar with the AFSPA, right? It is actually one of the controversial piece of Indian legislations which give some sort of adequate powers to the Indian military forces. Okay, so why that was in news? So recently, the Nagaland government has called for the repeal of AFSPA in the wake of public outrage against the killings. Okay, so recently the Nagaland has proposed the repeal of Armed Forces, a Special Power Act of 1958. See, actually under this particular AFSPA Act, okay, a central government or the governor of a particular state or the administrator of the union territory can declare a particular or the whole part of a state as a disturbed area. Okay, apart from that, the governor of the state has the power to overrule whatever may be the suggestions that has been put forward by the respective state government regarding with the limitation of the areas for the enforcement of AFSPA. Okay, that was amended over in Armed Forces Special Power Act, Amendment Act of 1990. Okay, so the governor has the special power to overrule the suggestion made by the state government regarding with the limitation over the implementation of geographical area of this particular piece of legislation. So what are the powers that was conferred to the military forces under the AFSPA or the Armed Forces Special Power Act? So it prohibits the gathering of 5 or more persons in a particular area. It allows the use of force or even open fire after giving a due warning if they feel a person is in contravention to the law, and they can even arrest a person without a warrant or the existing if a reasonable suspicious exists. Apart from that, the army can also enter or the search premises without a warrant and ban the possession of the firearms. Then any person that has been taken into the custody may hand over to the officer in charge to the nearest police station along with a report detailing the circumstances that led to the arrest. So these are some of the special powers that is conferred over the military forces under the AFSPA Act of 1958. So simply what is meant by disturbed areas, right? That may be your next doubt. So a disturbed area is declared by the notification of Section 3 of AFSPA. Usually the disturbed area is the differences or the dispute between the members of different religious, racial, language or regional groups of the caste or the communities. So that was defined under Section 3 of AFSPA Act of 1958. So that is regarding with AFSPA. So these bits of information are necessary for your UPSC preliminary examination. So in the context of UPSC mains examination, what is the questions that you can expect? See, actually India is a democratic country, right? So we are ruled by those who are elected by the people itself. So over a democratic country like India, how far do you think that a little bit controversial piece of legislations like the Armed Forces, a Special Power Act will going to violate the human rights in our India? Okay, whether it may be a controversial to the fundamental rights that was envisioned under Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, right? So this is the analysis part that you can expect for UPSC mains examination. So that's all about AFSPA or the Armed Forces, a Special Power Act of 1958.
Now here is another news for you, which is Durga Puja conferred with Intangible Cultural Heritage tag. Okay, so here UNESCO's Intergovernmental Committee for Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage on Wednesday at the due date put Durga Puja in Kolkata on the representative list of Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity. So what you have to understand here is that the representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity is of UNESCO. The list is maintained by UNESCO. Okay? And intangible means something that cannot be touched. Okay? So intangible cultural heritage. What is the meaning? Let's see. According to UNESCO, cultural heritage does not end at monuments and collection of objects. See, generally when you say cultural heritage, what image comes to your mind? The courts, the forts and the ancient Indian architecture. That's what comes to your mind, right? So that's not just it. That is part of it, but there is more to it. But also includes traditions or living expressions inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants, such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge and practice concerning nature and the universe, or the knowledge and the skill to produce traditional crafts. So all the skills or the cultural elements like the music and the dance or the craft or anything that has been passed on from the ancestors, which is part of the culture, is definitely a tangible, an intangible cultural heritage. Okay. Now, intangible cultural heritage, to be very specific, according to UNESCO, is traditional, contemporary and living at the same time. Okay. Inclusive, which includes all category of the people, representative of the community and community based. Okay, it's a mix of cultural essence that has the involvement of the community, and it is an important factor in maintaining cultural diversity in the face of growing globalization. Now globalization is growing and there is a Western influence to it. There is culture intermingling. In order to protect the cultural identity, in order to preserve them, it is essential that we recognize them. And one of the way is through the list that is safeguarded by, list that is maintained by UNESCO. Okay, and it is into that list the Durga Puja of Calcutta has entered. Okay, it's indeed a very proud moment for India. Now, and an understanding of the intangible cultural heritage of different communities helps with intercultural dialogue and encourages mutual respect for other ways of life. This is how India becomes tolerant, right? We have a lot of people with a lot of variety, languages, their culture is different, they have different outlook, perception, and we have so many languages, we have so many food items, every single thing in our country is different. And still we are all together. That means that the heritage, this intangible cultural heritage and its preservation, it actually plays a great role in inculcating respect for each other's culture and recognizing its importance and value. It's indeed a part of the value system of our society. Okay. Now, the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity currently in total has 492 elements. Okay, from India, apart from Durga Puja, see this is the list of things, list of the cultural elements that are there in UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage list. Okay, Kudiyatam from Kerala, Mudiyettu from Kerala, the Vedic chanting, Ram Leela, the Ramman from Uttarakhand, Kalbelia of Rajasthan, Chau dance, Ladakh Buddhist chanting, Manipuri Sankirtana, and the traditional brass and copper craft utensils making of the Tateras of Jandiala Guru Punjab, and the yoga, the Kumbh Mela. Okay, so you have to actually have an idea of what are the cultural elements that we have in the UNESCO's list. Okay, now Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. This is an additional knowledge that you can have. The Convention for Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage compiled two lists, which are representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity, that is 1, and the list of intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding, that is 2. Okay, so here in India, the Union Ministry of Culture, has appointed Sangeet Natak Academy, an autonomous organization under the Ministry of Culture. So, under the Ministry of Culture, there is Sangeet Natak Academy, which is an autonomous organization as nodal office for matters relating to the intangible cultural heritage, including for preparation of the nomination for the representative of list of UNESCO. So, which cultural elements should be actually there in the UNESCO's list? The nomination for that is done by Sangeet Natak Academy, which is an autonomous organization under the Ministry of Culture.
United Nations confers observer status on Solar Alliance. It is very important since India along with France took the initiative to constitute International Solar Alliance at 2015 Paris Climate Summit. Now, about International Solar Alliance, it was founded in 2015 at Paris Climate Change Summit, and it is a treaty-based intergovernmental organization. So, what do you mean by intergovernmental? Comprises of countries. The secretariat is located at Gurugram or Gurgaon, which is located within the national capital region of Delhi, not national capital territory of Delhi. The mandate of International Solar Alliance is to mobilize efforts against climate change through deployment of solar energy solutions. That is, to act as a framework to mobilize investments towards setting up of solar power plants, setting up of renewable power plants based out of solar power. Now, what are the specific objectives of International Solar Alliance? To mobilize funds worth 1 trillion or 100 billion US dollars to deploy 1000 gigawatt of solar energy by 2030. Beyond that, common risk mitigating mechanism, mitigate investment risk in solar projects in ISA member countries through diversifying and pooling risk on mutual public resources. Ensure solar energy at affordable cost, boosting the demand. Improve the standard of living with increased access to energy and livelihood opportunities, especially in rural and remote areas. Develop uniform standards in solar technologies so that we can keep the cost down and foster research and development in solar energy sector. And the most important aspect of International Solar Alliance is the members, the eligible members when it was constituted in 2015 was members lying between the tropic, partly or wholly between the tropics, that is between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. But this has been removed, the restrictions has been removed, and the eligibility to join the International Solar Alliance as of now has been open to all the countries of United Nations organization.
Then another piece of important information, that is Dhawan 1 achieved. So what is the significance or what is the context of that particular event? So the Skyroot Aerospace test fired India's first privately built cryogenic rocket engine, Dhawan 1. So that is the context. Actually, this is a particular improvement over Indian Space Research Organization. Okay. So it is an upper cryogenic stage, that is for the Vikram 2 launch vehicle, and its manufacturing method is actually the 3D printing technique. Its vacuum thrust is approximately 1.5 kilonewtons, and they are using methalox, LNG or the LOX as the fuel. So what is its advantage? High performance at low cost, then environment friendly. Okay. So actually this news is important, especially in the context of commercialization of Indian space program. First of all, you have to remember that the commercialization of Indian space program does not mean that we are completely privatized the space programs in our India. Rather, we are expecting the expert partnership from the private firms. Okay, so we can improve or we can commercialize our space products. For example, in case of US, I think you might have familiar with SpaceX. Okay, it is actually a private agency owned by Elon Musk. They are doing a certain set of products of their own. So the NASA can improve their own space programs. Similarly, the Indian government is actually expecting the adequate partnership from the private firms so we can improve or we can commercialize our space products. Okay, so that is on that particular context, the Skyroot Aerospace has developed the Dhawan 1 engine. It is actually a cryogenic upper stage engines. Okay, so that is regarding with a prelims perspective. In the perspective of mains, okay, you can see, you can expect a question, okay, how far such kind of commercialization of space programs can boost to the Indian economy or some similar type of questions. Okay, so that is regarding with long-term vision over such kind of commercialization of Indian space program. Okay, so that such kind of questions that you can expect. So that is regarding with Dhawan 1 engine. So remember, it is a first private built cryogenic rocket engine by Skyroot Aerospace.
The next news is that Diamond Jubilee celebrations of Goa's Liberation Day celebrated. So Goa, as you all know, has been attached to the Indian Republic after we got independence. Okay, so you must have learned about it in your post-independence classes. So here, on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Goa from Portugal in 1961, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated a raft of development and public work projects and felicitated freedom fighters and veterans of Operation Vijay, the military action in 1961 by which India liberated the territories of Goa, Daman and Diu from Portuguese rule. Okay, so Operation Vijay is related to liberation of Goa. That is the important point here. But for you to know, we'll go through what happened there. Okay, so Operation Vijay. Operation Vijay was an armed action carried out by the Indian Armed Forces on December 19, 1961. So Goa was liberated in 1961. It has been asked before in UPSC prelims in a chronology kind of question. Okay, to annex the then Portuguese Indian territories of Goa, Daman and Diu to the republics of India. So even after the British left and we got freedom in 1947, the Portuguese did not leave. They were reluctant to give back the territories to the Indian Republic. So we had to send an armed force to get back Goa from Portuguese. And in 1961, the armed forces in our country, they carried out an operation to get back, to liberate Goa. Okay. And then the Indian armed personnel managed to wrest control of Goa from the Portuguese, ending around 450 years of colonial rule. So for 450 years, the Portuguese ruled Goa. Okay. And in 16 January 1967, a referendum which is asking the people for their opinion, Goa Opinion Poll, was held to decide the future of the Union Territory of Goa, Daman and Diu within the Indian Union. And what was the question? The referendum offered the people of Goa a choice between continuing as a union territory or merging with the state of Maharashtra. The people of Goa voted against the merger and Goa continued to be a union territory. So then the referendum was all about a question whether the people in Goa, did they want a merger with the state of Maharashtra, or did they want to stay as a union territory? And they voted in favor of staying as a union territory. And in 1987, Goa became a full-fledged state within the Indian Union. Now, Goa is a state in India. Okay?
Permanent Commission for Women Officers in Armed Forces is a major debate that was predominantly covered by the media in 2021. The Supreme Court in Lieutenant Colonel Nitisha versus Union of India asked the army to implement permanent commission for women. And there are two types of commissions in army. Permanent commission, career in army till the age of retirement, and short service commission, career in army for 10 years with the option to either leave or choose a 4-year extension or opt for permanent commission at the end of 10 years. So these are the two types of commissions which are available for individuals aspiring to join the armed forces of India. But for women, in 1992, Women Special Entry Scheme was launched. Women were commissioned for a period of 5 years in non-combat streams such as Army Education Corps, Corps of Signals, Intelligence Corps and Corps of Engineers. So, they can serve in the army for a period of 5 years. Then, in 2006, Short Service Commission Scheme. Women were commissioned for a period of 10 years, as it is same with for the men. Extendable up to 14 years in non-combat streams such as Army Education Corps, Corps of Signals, Intelligence Corps and Corps of Engineers, as do their male counterparts. They can extend their service for another 4 years, extendable up to 14 years, 10 plus 4. But they are only eligible to serve in the non-combat streams, not in combat streams. Infantry, artillery, the women were denied entry. Then, serving women, special entry scheme officers at present were given the option to move to the new SSC scheme. That is, they can further extend their service for another 4 years or to continue under the erstwhile Women Special Entry Scheme. So, they can leave the army after their tenure of 10 years. But now, women can join the armed forces under permanent commission. They can have a career in the army till the age of retirement. Now, what are the major objections for giving permanent commission to women in the army? Motherhood, childcare, psychological limitations, physical limitations, behavioral and psychological challenges. All of this has been discussed in depth in our monthly magazine for the month of December. So you can refer those topics from our monthly magazine.
Another important species that was discovered recent by some sort of Canadian researchers, that is Cahutissuga sashicharam. Okay, see, the pronunciation seems to be a little bit difficult, right? Okay, you can pronounce it your own way, but remember it is actually a new marine reptile species. Okay, see, actually when you look into that particular figure, it seems to be a little bit similar to the dolphins, right? But remember, it is a marine reptile, not a fish. Okay, so actually it belongs to some sort of this particular term, Cahutissuga sashicharam. Okay, so it belongs to an indigenous language, belongs to Central Colombia, the one that cuts with something sharp. Okay, so it honors the musical tribal culture of the Central Colombia. So regarding with this particular species, it is a mid-sized ophthalmosauриan. Okay, apart from that, it belongs to Jurassic period. Okay, so it gives some sort of links because ophthalmosaurism, okay, sometimes or literally means eye lizard. Okay, so this particular species can give some sort of link between the evolution of the reptiles or the link between the reptiles and the species. That is the real significance of this particular discovery. So regarding with this particular species, it is a macropredatory vertebrate hunter and extremely large size eyes, then dolphin shaped body, jaws with a robust teeth are there, then 720 mm dendry, the long bone of the species. So that is regarding with Cahutissuga sashicharam. Okay, it is actually new, recently discovered marine reptile. Okay, it has a dolphin shaped body. Okay, so that is regarding with Kuhudisuga, Sashichar.
Now, Ken-Betwa River Interlinking Project, you have been hearing it since a long time, right? Now, the Union Cabinet approved the funding and implementation of Ken-Betwa Interlinking of Rivers project with a total cost of rupees 44,605 crore. The project will be completed in 8 years. So, they have approved the finance for the project. Okay. So, it is the first project under the National Perspective Plan for interlinking of rivers. Now, what is the National Perspective Plan? See, the National Perspective Plan was prepared by the then Ministry of Irrigation in August 1980 for transferring water from water surplus basins to water deficit basin. So, wherever water was in surplus, more from there, the water deficit basins will be getting water. And this will be done through interlinking of rivers. That is the National Perspective Plan, which was started in 1980. Okay, and Ken-Betwa River Interlinking Project was the first one under that scheme. Now, it envisages transferring water from the Ken River to Betwa River. Now, both are tributaries of Yamuna, and Ken and Betwa both are tributaries of Yamuna. And the Ken-Betwa link canal will be 221 km long, including a 2 km long tunnel. Okay. Now, on March 22, 2021, a memorandum of agreement was signed among the Ministry of Jal Shakti and the governments of Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh to implement the Ken-Betwa link project. And this is the picture. Now, when you study about something like geography, you definitely have to have the idea of a picture or visualization of that. Okay, so this is Yamuna river flowing through Uttar Pradesh here, and this is the Betwa river, and this is the Betwa river, see, and this is the Ken river flowing like this, Ken river, okay, and this is Madhya Pradesh, okay, this is Madhya Pradesh, this is Uttar Pradesh, and from here, the linking would go like this, and it would come here. But note, here is the Panna Tiger Reserve. Okay, the Panna Tiger Reserve here, and that is the whole issue. But here the linking would be like this. Okay. Now, a special purpose vehicle called Ken-Betwa Link Project Authority will be set up to implement the project, and the project lies in Bundelkhand, a drought-prone region which spreads across 13 districts of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. So, this region, Bundelkhand, it spread across 13 districts in both states, Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. And according to Jal Shakti Ministry, the project will be of immense benefit to water-starved regions, especially the district of Panna, Tikamgarh, Chhatarpur, Sagar, Damo, Datia in Madhya Pradesh, and likewise Banda, Mahoba, Jhansi, etc. in Uttar Pradesh. So, the water-starved regions would get water from this project is what the Ministry of Jal Shakti says. And according to the National Water Development Agency under the Jal Shakti Ministry, the Daudhan Dam to be built on Ken River will be 77 meters high, and its gross capacity will be 2,853 million cubic meters. Okay, that's how high the Daudhan Dam, which is going to be built in the Ken River, is. And the reservoir of Daudhan Dam will involve a submergence of 9,000 hectare area, out of which 5,803 hectares come under Panna Tiger Reserve, which means that the dam is going to actually flood the area, and the considerable area from Panna Tiger Reserve will be submerged. Okay, and the later includes 4,141 hectare of forest area, which is about 7.6% of the total Panna Tiger Reserve area. Okay, it will be submerged under water. That is the problem here. Now, when you know such a news, you have to go further and look for Panna Tiger Reserve. Now, Panna Tiger Reserve is a beautiful reserve. It's a critical tiger habitat located in the Vindhya Hills. If you're going through the previous year question papers, they always attach the geographical feature with the geographical area. the river with the place, the mountains with the protected areas and so on. Okay, so here Panna Tiger Reserve is located in the Vindhyan Hills in northern Madhya Pradesh and fragile through dynamic dry deciduous forest. This land is characterized by extensive plateaus and gorges. It is a land of mesmerizing waterfalls, naturals, archaeological splendors, legends and cultural richness. It is also the land of Ken River, which lends it unparalleled beauty. See, there is also another kind of question that can come from this area. They can give you this much information and ask you to identify which of the following is the above paragraph referring to. Questions like that has also been asked. Okay, so here United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which is known as UNESCO, has included Panna Biosphere Reserve recently in its World Network of Biosphere Reserve. This is very important, and in Madhya Pradesh, Panna Biosphere Reserve is the third to be included in the list after Pachmarhi and Amarkantak. Okay, so this is Betwa River here, this is Ken River here, okay, Ken River here. This is Panna Tiger Reserve, Panna here, Panna Tiger Reserve, and this is the link that you can see, which we have already seen. Okay, so make sure you know the geography of the area.
Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme. The government spent 80% of the funds under Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme on media campaigns, and Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme was launched in January 2015, and the objective is to address sex selective abortion and declining child sex ratio. We know that female feticide, female infanticide is very common, especially among the patriarchal societies of North India. Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme was launched to create awareness among the society to the importance of female children, the role the female children can play in the society. Now, it is very important to note that there are no economic incentives under Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme. There are no economic incentives. The only pillar of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme is to create awareness among parents, among the society, the importance of female children. Now, beyond that, monitoring and evaluation 6%, sectoral interventions in health 10%, sectoral interventions in education 10%, flexible funds 10%, intersectoral consultation, capacity building 16%, innovation or awareness generation activities 50%. So this is how the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme was to spend its expenditures. But what finally happened was that almost 80% of the fund was moved towards or was spent on media advertisements. So basically, sectoral interventions in education focuses on creating awareness within schools, the importance of female children, within schools, among children. Then sectoral interventions in health that would involve the participation of the midwives to ensure that female infanticide, female feticide is not getting reported. Now, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme, the important point is there is no financial incentives to the beneficiaries, to the mother or to the parents under Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme.
Then one of the another news regarding with the human-animal conflict. Okay, that is Project Rehab. Rehab means reducing elephant human attack using bees. Okay, see, actually human-animal conflict, it is one of the major problem, especially faced by the farmers, those who are living somewhat near to the forest areas. Okay, And such kind of incident, one of the important conflict is between the elephants and the human beings. So in order to reduce such kind of incident, okay, the Khadi and Village Industries Commission has put forward a new mission called Project Rehab. See, actually, you may be familiar that this particular elephants are disturbed with bees, right? Their sounds are very irritating to the elephants. So this particular rehab mission, okay, they are using some sort of bee boxes as the fences over their areas. So what happens? This sound produced by the bees will get irritated these particular elephants and they will get divert the path. Okay, so the farmers can save their crops from the attack of the elephants. So regarding with the Project Rehab, it is a sub-mission under National Honey Mission of Khadi and Village Industries Commission. And it is using some sort of fencing. Okay, we are using the bee fencing using the boxes, ward of elephants attacking in human habitation areas. Then the nodal agency will be the Khadi and Village Industries Commission. Okay, this specific bit of information is important for your UPSC preliminary examination. In the mains perspective, how we can expect a question? See, actually, in the context of economy, okay, the honey, it is one of the important product, especially from the tribal peoples. But due to the human-animal conflict, there are a lot of loss that is happened over the wildlife. So, at the same time, we can improve the economic capacity of the farmers along with the wildlife conservation. That is one of the major significance of this particular Project Rehab. So instead of using the fencing, okay, we are using some sort of bee boxes as the fencing. So this particular sound produced by the bees will get irritate the elephants and they can divert their routes. Okay, so what are the advantages? This suits the elephants without harming them. Highly cost effective as compared to erecting fences or digging the trenches. Then it will increase the income of the farmers from additional honey production, right? We have the dual advantages. Okay, the farmers can protect their crops, but at the same time, we can make honey from these particular honey boxes installed over the fencing. Okay, apart from that, it will address the climate change by regenerating the forest covers. So this is one of the advantages and one of the main significance under this particular Project Rehab. So that is regarding with the Project Rehab.
Now, Matua. Matua is an island. Okay, so recently Russia deployed its defense missile system called the Bastion system to Matua Island. This is just basic information about Matua Island, which is in the Kuril Islands. Okay, which is a part of the chain of islands in the Sea of Okhotsk and which is a marginal sea in the Pacific Ocean. So you have to know where Kuril Islands are located. And Kuril Islands are both claimed and the dispute is between Japan and Russia. Okay, and the Bastion system, it is a coastal defense missile system developed by Russia. Okay, so Bastion system is related to Russia and Matua Island is in the Kuril Islands, which is in the Pacific Ocean. These are the details that you have to keep in mind. Okay, especially when you study for prelims. Now see, this is Japan here. Okay, so this is Kuril Islands here. And if you take a magnified image of that, this is the Matua Island. Okay, this is the Pacific Ocean, the Sea of Okhotsk.
Panel to review EWS quota, Economic Weaker Section quota. The Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment appointed a 3-member committee to revisit the criteria for 10% reservation for economically weaker sections in education institutions and government jobs. Now, the mandate of the panel is to review the criteria determining EWS category, examine the methodologies followed in identifying the EWS category, and analyze and recommend a new criteria to identify the EWS in the country. Beyond that, it is very important to note the Constitutional Amendment 103 that implemented reservation for economically weaker sections in the country. The present criteria for economically weaker sections: individuals belonging to general class with an annual income below rupees 8 lakhs, ownership of agricultural land up to 5 acres, ownership of residential plot up to 1000 square feet, ownership of residential plot of 100 square feet in notified municipalities, ownership of residential plot of 200 square yards in areas other than the notified municipalities. They are eligible for the economically weaker section category. The reservations under economically weaker section categories to education institutions and appointments in public offices. Now, in this context, it is very important to understand Article 15. So, Article 15(4) says that nothing shall prevent the state from making special provisions for the advancement of socially and educationally backward classes or scheduled tribes or scheduled caste. It means positive reservations. Reservation is basically a positive discrimination. The state can in fact practice positive discrimination for uplifting socially and educationally backward classes and scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. We have given an in-depth analysis of all the topics that we have discussed in our magazine. All of you, in fact, needs to go through the magazine to have a better understanding, and that will help you to give answers for the competitive examinations for 2022.
Pacific Ring of Fire. This is one of the hot topics in geography when you actually learn plate tectonics. If you haven't learned that, you'll soon get the classes. Okay. So, what happened there? A 7.3 magnitude earthquake struck eastern Indonesia, which lies in the Ring of Fire. Now, the epicenter was in the Flores Sea north of East Nusa Tenggara province. Okay. Now, Indonesia experiences frequent quakes and volcanic eruptions due to its position on the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of intense seismic activity where tectonic plates collide that stretches from Japan through Southeast Asia and across the Pacific Basin. So, what is a Ring of Fire? Let me show you. This area in the Pacific Ocean is known as the Ring of Fire. This is the, this is India here. Okay, Russia, this is the US, this is the North American area, this is South American area, North American area. Okay, this is the Pacific Ocean altogether, the Pacific Ocean here. And this area bordering the Pacific Ocean is known as the Ring of Fire. Okay, so now you know the area. So the Ring of Fire, this is the place where this dotted area, this shows one plate. The theory behind plates and its movements will be taught to you in detail in the geography classes. For now, this is the Pacific plate, and the Pacific plate actually collides with a lot of other plates. Okay, so here the Ring of Fire, also referred to as the Circum-Pacific Belt, is a path along the Pacific Ocean characterized by active volcanoes, frequent earthquakes. The majority of Earth's volcanoes and earthquakes take place along the Ring of Fire. So, this is the area where most of the earthquakes and volcanic eruptions take place. Why? Because the Pacific plate, it actually collides with a lot of other plates, like the Pacific plate collides with the Cocos plate. See, Cocos plate is here. The Indian-Australian plate, which is over here. See, this is here. And the Nazca plate is here. The Nazca plate, the North American plate, which is here, and the Philippines plate, which is here. Okay, so see the Philippines plate here. See, there are a lot of plates that collides with this one big Pacific plate. Okay, and the Pacific plate is heavier because the oceanic plate is heavier than the continental plate. The oceanic plate actually submerges. Okay, it subsides under the lighter continental plate. And this subsiding land, the subsiding area, it goes down, becomes magma. Okay, so the volcanic activity and the movement of the plate causes earthquakes. Most of the areas in this area is like the convergent boundary. between plates. But this area in North America where the Pacific plate meets the North American plate, that area is a transform boundary wherein the plates move like this, slide past each other, causing a lot of earthquakes. So Indonesia comes in, its location in this ring of fire, okay, is in this ring of fire like here, okay, and that is why Indonesia and also the areas that are actually in the border area of this Pacific plate, which is known as the ring of fire, which is not actually like a proper circle, but like a ring, this ring, okay, this area, that is why it's known as the ring of fire, is an area that frequently has this earthquake and volcanic eruption. Okay, so its length is approximately 40,000 kilometers. It traces boundaries between several tectonic plates that we have seen right now. And roughly 90% of all earthquakes occur along the ring of fire, and the ring is dotted with 75% of all active volcanoes on Earth. Okay, so with that we have come to a conclusion of the important topics of current affairs. Make sure that you study well, and our team will always stay in touch with you. Thank you.